My name is Eliza Noh. I'm Associate Professor of Asian American Studies at Cal State Fullerton, and this is my life story. Well, my father is Korean, my mother is Vietnamese. They actually met during the Vietnam War. A lot of people don't know, but the South Korean Army were allies of the U.S. and they actually helped to fight in the war. My father was I think he was in the Korean Marines or something like that, and he was their medic, I guess. And my mother at the time was a midwife or training to be a midwife. And they met at a hospital in Saigon and got married in Vietnam and then immigrated to the United States and had their children. Well, I grew up in Texas, but after I graduated from high school, I really wanted to leave because I really wanted to. Growing up in Texas at the time was, it was a little bit oppressive because there weren't that many Asian Americans in my high school. I just kind of felt like it was very conservative and very restrictive, and so I knew I wanted to leave, right? So of course, if I could go to New York, I would. So I did. I went to Columbia University. I went in thinking at first that I would major in psychology because I didn't really know what to do. So psychology I was kind of interested in. Truthfully, I was interested in parapsychology because I was into now you have those ghost hunters. Like I was kind of into that. And then I majored in women's studies because psychology wasn't my thing. And then eventually, and we can talk more about this, I guess, but eventually I decided to learn more about ethnic studies. And so I did my doctoral degree in ethnic studies. It's very interesting because I went to Columbia University, and I'm kind of grateful that I went there because their curriculum, they have this kind of core curriculum, which basically is the study of Western civilization. So Western literature, Western philosophy, even Western music. And it was interesting because I learned what they taught was basically what not to do, right? Because I was like, after a while, I was like, okay, Plato and St. Augustine and, Picasso, basically these are the great white men of Western civilization. And it started to make me think, well, where are the women, right? And so I did take this course in women's studies, and it was called Power, Politics, and Poetry. And it was like, wow, this is strange. What kind of course is called Power, Politics, and Poetry? And so it opened my eyes to the study of women and gender and how to look at things from a gendered perspective, because things were gendered. And then it made me think about, wow, why is it that on their library, it's like it lists all these, they have these kind of engraved names of all the kind of the great men in history. Mm-hmm. And it was like Plato and all these other ones. Where are the women? And so this course made me kind of see what was rendered invisible. But then, as a women's studies major, it was basically the study of white women. So again, what not to do, right? And so that politicized me. And so as an undergraduate, I started to join up with other Asian American women students, and we started lobbying for Asian American studies. And so while we were there, and they didn't have Asian American studies, so while we were there, we were able to get adjunct courses. So first it was an Asian American history class. Then it was an Asian American literature class. But these were one-time courses. It wasn't like a program that was consistent. And so that made me want to further my education. And so I decided to pursue ethnic studies. And at the time, the only kind of visible program was ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. And so I decided to pursue that. So when I decided to do that, it was purely just because I was curious. I just wanted to learn more without any idea of what I was going to do with it or whatnot. Yeah. But now I see that now I'm working in the field, and now I'm a professor of ethnic studies. And I see that it is important for students because of the same kind of journey that I went to of wanting to understand who I am, what is my place in the world, and then also this realization that this is part of our American civilization. This is part of Western civilization. So everyone should be learning this. It's not just something that I should be learning, or just Asian Americans or just people of color or women of color should be learning about themselves. It's not just self-centered. It's something that everybody should be learning about their society. So I think that's why it's important. Yeah. Well, I think that, first of all, that young people, college age, high school, don't realize their power. And that's number one, that they don't realize their power. It's not that they should necessarily, I would not recommend for people in their 20s or younger should have to plug into any existing model, because really they have their own interests and their own passions and their own abilities. So for instance, if we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, and just in general, like a lot of these kinds of social movements come from young people, and they do it the way they want to do it in the way that is effective for them. So this whole kind of online presence is something that they have developed, and is not something that they are plugged into. So in order to become more proactive, I think just for students and young people to search their passion and what are they interested in, and what do they already do? If you're already on Facebook, then, or if you're already interested in YouTube, or some other kind of passion, then that's how you plug in. It's not necessarily that you have to join a community-based organization, or that you have to protest in the traditional way with posters and so forth. Maybe that is one way, but I think the solution comes from realizing your own power, and then from there figuring out what are you interested in, and how can you express your opinions about that issue. Historically, there were certain waves of feminist movements. Like, so first wave was, I guess you could say, was focused on the suffrage movement, which is to the vote for women. You could say kind of second wave is 60s, 70s, right? During, a lot of the civil rights movement and power movements that were going on. And part of it was the women's movement. But what a lot of women of color noticed in a lot of the 80s, when they were doing a lot of their writing, was that a lot of the issues that women's movement was focusing on during the 60s and 70s were middle-class heterosexual white women's issues. And so a lot of these issues of framing of what is issues that women care about were very exclusionary. And so in the 80s, there were a lot of books written, such as This Bridge Called My Back, Making Face, Making Soul, which were basically writings by radical women of color. And so some of the issues that they raised as being different, women of color feminism versus white women's feminism, are things like issues of poverty, issues of reproductive rights, which are different for working class women and middle class women, such as for middle class women, the issue might be access to birth control, right? So access to contraceptives and the control of your bodies. But for women of color, the control of one's body is not necessarily access to birth control. It's not to be sterilized, right? Because at the time, there were these sterilization programs which targeted women of color, working class women. So you can see that the issues are different. The idea of reproductive rights is different. So that's why it's important to have a women of color perspective, and not just to kind of assume that womanhood is unified. In my family, and one of the reasons why Asian American studies and Asian American women is so interesting to me is that in my family, my sister committed suicide when I was in college. And that just really affected me, and it made me want to learn, to actually raise awareness about this issue, because I know that it's a problem. I knew at the time, I was in college at the time, I knew that it was a problem, but no one was writing about it or talking about it or researching about it. And so that actually became the topic of my senior thesis as an undergrad. And as I said, I wanted to learn more about ethnic studies. And so eventually it became the topic of my dissertation project. And then I guess something that you might want to know if you go to grad school, whatever you write on your dissertation ends up being kind of like your career or your specialty, your expertise. And so ever since, I have just kind of been developing it. And I do studies of Asian American women who have attempted or considered suicide. And so I interview women of all ages. And so that's just kind of, I think that was the topic of the CNN article. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that came out of my study in these interviews with Asian American women is the thing that came up the most often was this pressure to succeed. And there's this expectation that they should succeed, that they should be smart, particularly, that they should become professionals like doctors, lawyers, engineers, and so forth. And so there's this pressure to succeed, and it's because of the model minority stereotype. And so there was this tendency for them to self-blame if they didn't do well and get good grades, or if they didn't perform well, or if they didn't get to that particular grad school or that particular college. And so it affected them mentally and their mental well-being because they start to internalize that stereotype. But I think that continues today because my interviews took place, I think, originally from like 98. And I think that my last interview recently anyway was 2014 or 2012 or something like that. And the issues keep coming up. It's an ongoing issue. And the model minority stereotype is still very prevalent. There's still the stereotype that Asian Americans are good at math, or that they're good at science, or that they're going to ruin the grade curve, right? And there's these acronyms that people use for certain college campuses because it's perceived that Asian Americans are taking over. So that is an ongoing stereotype. No, I think the stereotype has to be overcome by constantly challenging the truth of it. It's actually a myth that Asian Americans do well because there are some people who do well, but there's a huge population, a huge proportion that does not do well. So, for example, some Southeast Asian communities don't even meet the national average of graduating from high school even. And there's also a certain percentage of Asian Americans who are living below the poverty line, Southeast Asian Pacific Islanders. Pacific Islanders have significant mental health issues, which, because, part of the Asian Americans doing well is that we don't have any social problems or mental health problems included. And so those are all things that are erased or hidden because of this stereotype. So that's why people call it a model minority myth, because it's actually not true. So the way to challenge that is by raising awareness about the realities and the diversity of Asian American experiences, that we're all not professionals who have, brought money with us when we immigrated. Some of us are refugees. Some of us are still living under colonialism. So that's something that has to be through raising awareness and constantly challenging that image through writing about it, through doing more research, through talking about it. I think that Asian American Heritage Month or Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month is still needed because as long as there is a situation where Asian American history and heritage culture is excluded from the curriculum, then we need to have a focused discussion about it. So until that exclusion is not a problem, until we are included, that's something that is unfortunately still needed. And sometimes people make the same argument about ethnic studies. So why does there have to be a focused study on people of color, communities of color? Why not have that integrated into English, into history and sociology? That would be great. They should be, right? American culture, American history is multicultural. Then if we had that, then we would not need ethnic studies. But it's unfortunately not a reality. What is most fulfilling to me about working at Cal State Fullerton is, number one, working with students, working with community members, and my wonderful colleagues in Asian American Studies. It's a great community. I like to see students having that aha moment when they take our classes, when they realize, like, wow, actually my experiences, the personal is political. My experiences are things that I can learn from. And it's not just something that I have to kind of put aside, that I can actually integrate in my passions, my experiences, my interests. I can actually integrate into my lifelong passions, my career even. And those are the kind of these aha moments, unfortunately, in college, because they never encountered these kinds of courses in high school. So hopefully, if ethnic studies becomes integrated into K through 12, they won't be having these aha moments in college, and they'll just be like, of course, Asian American history, I took that class. And so, but that is definitely part of the benefits of working in Asian American Studies today in college, is seeing students really kind of coming into their own and feeling empowered and seeing that process of awakening. Yeah. These days, and I think people have written about this, is that this is trend of the university becoming corporatized. And there's a general attack on general education. And I think that this is very bad for our society, because general education broadens people. That's why it's called general education, right? Is to kind of give people a general breadth of knowledge that is not just so focused vocationally. And that's not what we need for our society. We need informed, engaged citizens, people who can participate and be informed and participate in a way that they are fully aware of the social issues of our society. If they are just too focused narrowly on like a vocation, or just even just narrowly on their own experience, then we'll just have a whole bunch of individualistic individuals running around, and then it's not good for them either, because they'll find often that their degree didn't take them anywhere. It wasn't broad enough, that made them flexible enough that they could do anything they wanted with it. If I wanted to impart a message to young people, is that don't be so hard on yourself. Because if you go through college, or just being a young person going through your life, you don't have to have it all figured out. You absolutely don't. And even after you graduate from college, you still don't have to have it all figured out. It's a process, and don't think that you have to decide what your major is, or you have to decide what your career path is, because life is long. Right? You think, okay, I have to decide by my 20-somethings. Like, well, how long do you intend to live? Do you intend to like die in your 40s? No, you probably want to live into your 90s, 100s, right? That's a long life. Life is long, and so be understand that it's a long journey.